A Rose in Midnight, a Vampire Romance Story Part 1. The night blanketed Montreux in a shroud of mist, the air thick with the mingling scents of jasmine and rain-soaked earth. Étienne moved like a shadow through the narrow cobblestone streets, his long coat billowing behind him, his crimson eyes glinting faintly in the moonlight. For centuries, he had walked the earth, immortal and alone, his existence a languid waltz through time. But tonight, something stirred in the ether, pulling him from his practiced solitude. He heard it before he saw her, a voice rich and low, laced with sorrow and defiance. The melody rose and fell like the whisper of ancient tides, weaving its way through the damp air until it seemed to wrap around him, a siren's call. He turned toward the sound, his steps unhurried yet purposeful, and found himself before a small café bathed in warm, flickering light. Inside, the scent of humanity enveloped him, wine, tobacco, and the faint coppery tang of blood. Étienne lingered in the doorway, unseen, as his gaze fell on her. She sat at an old upright piano, her fingers gliding effortlessly over the keys. Her dark hair spilled like ink over her shoulders, framing a face both haunting and fierce. Her eyes, shadowed and deep as the midnight sea, seemed to carry the weight of untold stories. When her song ended, the applause came reluctantly, as if her audience feared breaking the spell she had cast. Étienne watched as she rose, her movements unhurried but deliberate. She was mortal, unmistakably so, yet something in her presence felt eternal. He was about to retreat when she turned, her gaze locking onto his through the haze of candlelight. Her lips, painted the color of ripe berries, curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "Are you going to stand there all night?" she asked, her voice as rich as her song. Caught off guard, Étienne stepped into the room, the heavy door clicking shut behind him. "Forgive me. I was drawn to your music." "And you are?" she prompted, arching a brow. "Étienne," he said, his voice smooth and measured. "A traveler, passing through." Her smile deepened, though it did not quite reach her eyes. "Selene," she offered. "And if you're just passing through, you have peculiar timing." He could have walked away then. Should have. But there was something in the way she looked at him, steady, unflinching, as though she could see through the carefully constructed facade he had worn for centuries. "I'd like to hear more of your music," he said instead. Selene tilted her head, studying him. "Then stay a while." That night, Étienne found himself seated at the edge of her world, a glass of untouched wine before him as Selene played for the sparse crowd. Her music was unlike anything he had heard in decades, raw, unpolished, and painfully beautiful. When the last patron had gone, she joined him at the bar, her gaze sharp and curious. "You don't drink," she observed, gesturing to his untouched glass. "Not wine," he admitted, a faint smile playing on his lips. "And what do you drink, Étienne?" He hesitated, the words caught in his throat. He was not one to reveal his nature, but Selene seemed unfazed, as though she already knew. "That depends," he said carefully, meeting her gaze. Selene leaned closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "On what?" "On whether I'm welcome," he replied, the faintest edge to his tone. To his surprise, she laughed, not the tinkling, hollow sound he was used to from mortals, but something full and rich, like the earth after a storm. "You're either very bold or very foolish," she said, her dark eyes sparkling. "Perhaps both." In the days that followed, Étienne returned to the café each night. At first, he told himself it was the music that drew him, the solace of her melodies easing the ache of centuries of solitude. But it was more than that. It was the way Selene spoke with an honesty that cut through his carefully guarded walls, the way she seemed to see him, truly see him, in a way no one else had. They walked together beneath the weeping willows by the river, their conversations weaving a fragile intimacy. Étienne found himself confessing things he had long buried, the loneliness of immortality, the burden of unrelenting hunger. And Selene, in turn, shared her own sorrows, a life marked by betrayal, by the loss of those she had loved too deeply. Yet she did not shy away from him, even as the truth of his nature became impossible to ignore. "I've seen your kind before," she said one night, her voice quiet but certain. Étienne froze, his crimson eyes meeting hers. And yet you do not run. No, she said simply. Because I know you won't hurt me. Her words unsettled him. He had spent centuries mastering his hunger, ensuring he could coexist with mortals without succumbing to the thirst that defined him. But Selene tested his control in ways he had not anticipated. To be continued.